The crystal champagne flute nearly slipped from my fingers when I heard him say it. "Oh, Becca, she's just a housewife." My husband's dismissive laugh echoed across the elegant ballroom as he clinked glasses with the investors who hung on his every word. If only Daniel knew that 12 hours earlier I had signed the final papers making me the majority shareholder of Skyline Technologies, his precious company. The company he had no idea was slipping through his fingers while he stood there dismissing the very woman who now controlled his fate. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the exact moment when everything changed. Not when Daniel called me just a housewife at the company gala, though that would become the tipping point, but months earlier, on a rainy Tuesday morning in our Beacon Hill townhouse. I was organizing Daniel's home office, something I did weekly despite his protests that I would mess up his system. 15 years of marriage had taught me that his system was creative chaos at best. As I filed away some documents, a small thumb drive fell from between two folders. It wasn't labeled, which was unusual for Daniel. He labeled everything. Curiosity got the better of me. I plugged it into his laptop. I knew his password, of course. Another benefit of being just a housewife is that people underestimate how much you notice. What I found wasn't the quarterly reports I expected, but a detailed plan to restructure Skyline Technologies, the financial software company Daniel had built over the last decade. The restructuring included selling off the AI division, the division I had helped conceptualize before I stepped back from my own career in finance to support his dreams and raise our daughter, Emma. That might not sound significant to an outsider, but it was a betrayal that cut deep. The AI division was built on my research, my graduate thesis work. When we got married, Daniel had promised me we would always be partners, that my stepping back to support his career was temporary. "One day, Becca," he'd said, "we'll build something together." But as the years passed, that promise faded. Daniel grew more successful, more arrogant, and I became increasingly invisible, at least professionally. I managed our home, raised our daughter, hosted his business dinners, and stood dutifully beside him at company events. I became Daniel Morgan's wife rather than Rebecca Morgan, the woman who had graduated top of her class from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and finance. The thumb drive wasn't just plans. It contained private conversations with potential buyers, undervaluing the division's worth. Daniel was planning to sell my brainchild for a fraction of its value to a competitor who would likely dismantle it, all to fund his expansion into Asian markets, something I had cautioned against just months before, only to be patted on the head with a condescending, "It's complicated business stuff, Becca, don't worry about it." I didn't confront him that day. Something had shifted inside me, a quiet awakening that demanded strategy, not emotion. I copied the drive, put everything back exactly as I found it, and did what any underestimated housewife would do. I called my old business professor, Eleanor Williams. Eleanor had been more than a professor to me. She had been a mentor, a woman who blazed trails in venture capital when female investors were rare. She had never approved of my decision to step back from my career. "Talent like yours doesn't come along often, Rebecca," she had told me at our last lunch before I left Boston Financial Partners to support Daniel's company. "Don't let it go dormant for too long." We met at her lakeside cottage in New Hampshire that weekend. Daniel thought I was at a spa retreat with friends, one of my few indulgences he tolerated because it meant I was refreshed for his next dinner party. "You're not surprised," I said to Eleanor after I showed her the files. We sat on her deck overlooking the lake, the autumn leaves creating a canvas of red and gold against the water. Eleanor sipped her tea, her silver hair gleaming in the morning light. "No, I'm not. Men like Daniel often mistake support for submission. They believe that because you chose to prioritize family, you've surrendered your intellect. She set down her cup with deliberate precision. But that's not why you're here, Becca. You didn't drive 3 hours to hear me confirm what you already know. So tell me, what do you want to do about it? I want to save my division, I replied without hesitation. But more than that, I want to remember who I used to be before I became just Daniel Morgan's wife. Eleanor smiled, that knowing smile that had terrified and inspired generations of business students. Then let's get to work. What followed was 2 months of careful, meticulous planning. I reconnected with my network, former colleagues who remembered brilliant Becca and were surprised to hear from me after years of domestic obscurity. I was surprised at how quickly it all came back. The financial models, the market analyses, the strategic thinking that had once been second nature to me. Eleanor introduced me to Martin Blackwood at First Summit Capital, a hedge fund known for strategic acquisitions. They've been interested in Skyline for years, Eleanor explained, but Daniel has always refused to entertain their offers. Martin was skeptical at first. A housewife wanting to orchestrate a takeover of her husband's company hardly inspired confidence. But when I presented my analysis of Skyline's true value, including the undervalued AI division, he began to see what Eleanor already knew. I wasn't just Daniel Morgan's wife. I was the financial strategist who had helped launch Skyline in the first place. The company is vulnerable, I explained, pointing to the fluctuations in their stock following a mediocre third quarter. Daniel's Asian expansion plans have worried the board. They're overextended, and the restructuring he's planning is a desperate move to generate capital. But selling the AI division would be a fatal mistake. It's the future of the company. Martin leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with newfound respect. What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Morgan? A silent acquisition through a holding company? I want to purchase enough shares to become the majority stakeholder before Daniel can finalize the division sale. Martin raised an eyebrow. And the capital for this acquisition. This was where things got complicated. My own finances were considerable. I had inherited my parents' estate 5 years ago and had quietly been managing those investments separate from our joint accounts. Daniel, who handled all that boring financial stuff for our household, had no idea that I had grown my inheritance into a substantial sum. But it wasn't enough for what I was planning. I'm putting in everything I have, I said, and I need First Summit to finance the rest. With what collateral? Martin challenged. I slid a folder across the desk. Patents, 23 of them, to be exact. All essential to Skyline's core products. All in my name. Martin's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. These are registered to you personally, not to Skyline? I nodded. Daniel thought it was more tax efficient at the time. He never changed the registrations after the company went public. Another detail he didn't think was important enough to worry about. I paused. I'm not looking to destroy Skyline, Mr. Blackwood. I want to save it from Daniel's ego and short-sightedness. The AI division isn't just my passion project. It's the most valuable asset the company has, though my husband is too blinded by his expansionist dreams to see it. The plan moved quickly after that. First Summit created a holding company, Phoenix Ventures, with me as the primary stakeholder. We began quietly acquiring Skyline shares, careful to stay below the threshold that would trigger public disclosure requirements. It was a delicate operation, buying enough to matter, but not so much that Daniel or the board would notice a pattern. All this was happening while I maintained my role as the perfect corporate wife. I hosted a dinner for Skyline's board members in our home, smiling as Daniel joked about how I couldn't tell a balance sheet from a bedsheet. I stood by his side at industry events, playing the supportive spouse while secretly meeting with investors, in private rooms at the same hotels. I managed our household, attended Emma's school functions, and planned Daniel's birthday celebration, all while orchestrating the most significant business move of my life. The final pieces fell into place 3 days before Skyline's annual gala. Jason Reynolds, the company's CFO and one of the few executives who had always treated me with respect, requested a private meeting. We met at a small cafe in Cambridge, far from Daniel's usual haunts. "Something's happening with the company stock," Jason said without preamble. "Someone's been buying up shares through multiple channels. The board is getting nervous." He studied me over his coffee cup. "Daniel? Doesn't know yet. He's too focused on the Hong Kong deal." I kept my expression neutral. "Why are you telling me this, Jason?" He hesitated, then pushed a folder across the table. "Because I found these when I was preparing for the division sale. Preliminary research proposals for Skyline's AI capabilities. Your name is on all of them, Becca." I felt a surge of emotion. Someone had remembered my contributions, had recognized that I wasn't just the CEO's wife. "Daniel's making a mistake selling the division," Jason continued. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "But he won't listen to me. He's convinced this Asian expansion is the answer to our capital problems." He leaned forward. "I don't know what you're planning, but I've worked with both of you. I remember who came up with our core algorithm when we were working out of that tiny office in Cambridge. It wasn't Daniel." I took a deep breath. What if there was a way to stop the sale, to keep the AI division intact and refocus the company on innovation rather than expansion? Jason's eyes narrowed. "You're behind the stock purchases." I didn't confirm or deny, but I didn't need to. Jason had always been perceptive. "The board meets the morning after the gala to vote on the division sale," he said quietly. "If someone were to present an alternative strategy before then, with enough voting power to back it up..." He left the implication hanging. "Would you support such a strategy?" I asked. Jason finished his coffee and stood to leave. "I've always believed in backing the smartest person in the room, Becca. For years, Daniel convinced everyone that was him." He smiled slightly. "I think we're about to find out if he was right." The final acquisition went through 12 hours. Before the gala, a nerve-wracking down-to-the-wire transaction that gave Phoenix Ventures, and by extension me, 51% ownership of Skyline Technologies. Eleanor called with the confirmation as I was getting dressed for the event. "It's done," she said, her voice triumphant. "Congratulations. Majority shareholder Morgan." I sat down on the edge of our bed, suddenly overwhelmed by what I had accomplished, and what was still to come. "He has no idea, Eleanor. He's downstairs right now, entertaining the early arrivals, completely unaware that his company isn't his anymore." "Are you having second thoughts?" Eleanor asked, concern evident in her voice. I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, the elegant black gown, the careful makeup, the picture of a successful executive's wife. Tonight would be the last time I played that role. "No," I said firmly. "No second thoughts, just preparing myself for what comes next. Remember why you're doing this, Becca. Not for revenge, but for restoration. Of the company's true potential and of your own identity." I took a deep breath. I remember. When I descended the stairs to our townhouse's main floor, Daniel barely glanced my way, too engrossed in his conversation with Kevin Parker, the board chair. I circulated among the early guests, playing hostess until it was time to leave for the main event at the Harborview Hotel. The gala was Skyline's most important social event of the year, a celebration of the company's achievements and an opportunity to impress clients and investors. This year's theme was Expanding Horizons, a not-so-subtle nod to Daniel's Asian market ambitions. As we entered the hotel's grand ballroom, Daniel was immediately surrounded by admirers and sycophants. I separated from him, making my way to the bar where I ordered a sparkling water with lime. I needed a clear head for what was coming. "You look like a woman with a secret," said a voice beside me. I turned to find Megan Chen, my closest friend, and one of the few people who knew about my plan. The biggest, I replied with a small smile. Is everything ready for tomorrow? Megan nodded. Eleanor has the presentation prepared, legal has the documents drawn up, and I've reserved the conference room at First Summit for 8 a.m., plenty of time before the board meeting at 11. Megan had been my roommate at MIT, and now ran her own tech consultancy. She had been my sounding board throughout this entire process, offering both emotional support and practical advice. When I had moments of doubt, questioning whether I was overreacting to Daniel's plans, Megan had been the one to remind me of what was really at stake. You built that algorithm, Becca, she had said. Your research, your vision. Are you really going to let him sell it off without a fight? Now, as we stood watching Daniel hold court across the room, Megan squeezed my arm encouragingly. Ready? To stop being invisible? Before I could answer, Daniel beckoned me over with a wave that didn't even attempt to be subtle. The summoning gesture of a man who had long ago stopped seeing his wife as an equal. I excused myself from Megan and crossed the room, the weight of what I was about to do making each step feel significant. I approached the circle of men surrounding. My husband, investors from Hong Kong who were critical to his expansion plans. Daniel placed his arm around my waist, an affectionate gesture that was more possessive than loving. Gentlemen, my wife Rebecca, he introduced, before immediately returning to his conversation about projected returns and market penetration. One of the investors, perhaps trying to be polite, turned to me. Mrs. Morgan, your husband tells us, Skyline is on the verge of a major transformation. You must be very proud. Before I could respond, Daniel laughed and cut in. Oh, Becca, she's just a housewife. She leaves all the business decisions to me. He patted my shoulder condescendingly. Her job is making sure I have a clean shirt for meetings like this one. Right, darling? The men chuckled, and I felt the familiar sting of Daniel's casual dismissal. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't just his underestimated wife. I was the majority shareholder of Skyline Technologies. I smiled, not the accommodating smile of a supportive spouse, but the confident smile of someone who knew something no one else in the circle did. Actually, I said, I find corporate strategy fascinating, particularly the long-term value of innovation versus rapid expansion. Daniel's grip on my waist tightened in warning. Becca, he said through his fixed smile, I'm sure these gentlemen don't want to be bored with domestic opinions on complex business matters. The investor looked uncomfortable, caught between Daniel's dismissal and my unexpected assertion. I locked eyes with him and continued. For instance, I've always believed that Skyline's true value lies in its AI capabilities. Selling off that division for short-term capital would be. I paused, holding Daniel's increasingly alarmed gaze. A catastrophic strategic error. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's face had gone rigid, his smile frozen in place as he tried to process what was happening. The investors exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. If you'll excuse us, Daniel said tightly, I need a private word with my wife. He practically dragged me toward a quiet corner of the ballroom, his fingers digging into my arm. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed. Those men are about to invest millions in our expansion, and you're spouting off about divisions you know nothing about. I removed his hand from my arm, my voice calm but firm. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Daniel. I designed that division's core algorithm. Or have you convinced yourself that was your brilliant innovation too? His face darkened. That was years ago, Becca. The company has evolved. The markets have changed. You've been out of the game too long to understand what's at stake. Out of the game, I repeated. Is that what you think happened when I stepped back to raise our daughter and support your career? That my brain stopped working? That I stopped paying attention? Daniel glanced nervously over his shoulder at the investors who were watching our exchange with curiosity. "This isn't the place for this conversation," he said. "We'll discuss it at home. Right now, I need you to go back to being my supportive wife for just one more hour. Can you do that? For the sake of everything we've built?" I almost laughed at the irony of his words. Everything we had built, as if he still believed there was a partnership between us. "One more hour," I agreed. "But tomorrow, everything changes." Relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by his usual confidence. He'd always been able to manage me, after all. Why should tonight be any different? "That's my girl," he said, patting my cheek in a gesture that made my skin crawl. "Now, let's get back to the party. I'm about to announce the Hong Kong partnership." As Daniel returned to his investors, I caught Megan's eye across the room. She raised an eyebrow in question, and I gave her a subtle nod. Everything was proceeding as planned. For the rest of the evening, I played my part. The dutiful wife, the elegant hostess, the woman who existed in the background of Daniel Morgan's success story. I stood beside him during his speech about Skyline's bright future, applauded at all the right moments, and smiled for the company photographer. But beneath the performance, my mind was already in tomorrow's boardroom, where Daniel Morgan would discover that his wife was far more than the domestic support system he had reduced her to. Tomorrow, he would learn that while he had been dismissing my domestic opinions, I had been orchestrating the most significant business move of Skyline's history. Tomorrow, he would understand that the woman he had introduced as just a housewife had already bought his company. I barely slept that night. Daniel came to bed late, reeking of expensive scotch and self-satisfaction. The Hong Kong investors had been impressed with his presentation. The preliminary agreements had been signed. In his mind, everything was proceeding perfectly. "You were quiet on the ride home," he mumbled as he loosened his tie. "Still upset. About earlier?" "You know I didn't mean anything by it." I watched him from my side of our king-sized bed, this man I had once admired so deeply. When had he become this person? Or had he always been this way, and I had simply been too in love to notice? "It's fine," I replied, the words hollow. "We can talk about it tomorrow." Daniel grunted, already half asleep. "Not tomorrow. Board meeting in the morning, division sale vote. Big day." Yes, I thought, a big day indeed. I rose before dawn, careful not to wake him. I showered and dressed in a tailored navy suit I had purchased specifically for this day. Not one of the designer outfits Daniel had bought me for company functions, but something I had chosen for myself. Professional, powerful, mine. I left a note saying I had an early appointment and would see him at the office later. It wasn't a lie, technically. Eleanor was waiting for me at First Summit Capital's offices, immaculate as always in her signature gray pantsuit, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. The conference room was already set up, presentation materials arranged neatly, legal documents stacked in precise order, coffee and breakfast pastries waiting on the sideboard. "Nervous?" Eleanor asked as she handed me a cup of coffee. I exhaled slowly. Terrified, exhilarated, everything at once. She smiled. "That's how you know it matters." Jason Reynolds arrived precisely at 8 a.m., followed shortly by Kevin Parker, the board chair. Kevin's presence was a surprise. I had expected Jason to brief him after our meeting, not to bring him directly into our confidence. "Mrs. Morgan," Kevin greeted me with evident confusion. "Jason said this was urgent, but I wasn't expecting this." He gestured vaguely at the formal setup of the room. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "What I'm about to share affects the future of Skyline Technologies in ways that cannot wait until the board meeting." Kevin settled reluctantly into the chair, his eyes darting between me, Eleanor, and Jason. "If this concerns the division, sale, I should inform you that the decision has already been made?" I finished for him. "Not quite." I slid a folder across the table. These documents confirm that as of yesterday evening, Phoenix Ventures holds a 51% majority stake in Skyline Technologies. Kevin's face remained impassive as he opened the folder, but his quickening breath betrayed his shock. "This can't be legal," he murmured, flipping through the pages. "I assure you, it is entirely legal," Eleanor interjected smoothly. "Every acquisition was properly executed through public markets. No disclosure laws were violated." Kevin looked up at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. "You're behind Phoenix Ventures." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I am Phoenix Ventures' primary stakeholder, yes." "Does Daniel know?" "Not yet." Kevin leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "So you've called us here to what? Gloat? Issue demands?" I shook my head. "I've called you here to save Skyline from a catastrophic strategic error and to propose a new direction for the company." For the next hour, I presented my analysis of Skyline's position, not as Daniel's wife, but as a financial strategist with intimate knowledge of the company's foundations. I detailed why selling the AI division would cripple Skyline's long-term growth potential, how the Asian expansion was premature given current market volatility, and how refocusing on our core technology would yield greater shareholder value over the next 5 years. The presentation was comprehensive, data-driven, and irrefutable. I had spent months preparing it, analyzing every aspect of Skyline's operations with the perspective of someone who had helped build its foundation, but could now see its flaws with clear eyes. When I finished, there was silence. Kevin stared at the projection screen, where a graph clearly showed the projected outcomes of Daniel's strategy versus mine. Finally, he spoke. "You realize what you're proposing would essentially undo everything Daniel has worked toward for the past year." "What I'm proposing would save everything he's worked for the past decade," I countered. "The Asian expansion isn't just premature, it's reckless. Daniel is gambling the company's future on his ego." "And you're not?" Kevin challenged. "This hostile takeover is neither hostile nor a takeover in the traditional sense," I interrupted. "I have no intention of removing Daniel as CEO, provided he's willing to reconsider his direction and work with the board on a more sustainable growth strategy." I paused. "But the division sale will not proceed. That's non-negotiable." Kevin glanced at Jason, who had remained mostly silent throughout the presentation. "The numbers support Mrs. Morgan's analysis," Jason said quietly. "I've had similar concerns about the expansion timeline, but Daniel has been unreceptive to alternative perspectives." Kevin sighed heavily. "The board meeting starts in 2 hours. Daniel is expecting us to approve the division sale and announce it this afternoon." I closed my laptop. "Then I suggest we prepare for a different kind of meeting." Eleanor stepped forward with another folder. "These are the legal documents asserting Phoenix Ventures' rights as majority shareholder. Mrs. Morgan will be attending the board meeting in that capacity." Kevin took the folder with resignation. "This will destroy him," he said, almost to himself. I felt a twinge of something. Not regret, exactly, but acknowledgement of the weight of what I was doing. "This doesn't have to destroy anyone," I said. "Daniel built something valuable. I'm just ensuring it stays that way." As Kevin and Jason left to prepare for the board meeting, Eleanor touched my arm. "Are you ready for the next part? It will be personal, Becca." Daniel won't separate the business decision from the marriage. I thought about the years I had spent supporting Daniel's dreams while setting my own aside. The gradual erosion of his respect, the casual dismissals, the way he had come to see me as an accessory to his success rather than its co-architect. "I know," I said softly, "but that's a separate conversation." We arrived at Skyline's headquarters 30 minutes before the scheduled board meeting. The executive floor was buzzing with activity, assistants rushing about with last-minute preparations, board members arriving and exchanging muted greetings. No one seemed to notice me at first. I was just Daniel Morgan's wife, presumably there to bring him a forgotten document or deliver a personal message. Then Sophia Garcia, Daniel's executive assistant, spotted me walking toward the boardroom. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Mrs. Morgan," she stammered, "the board meeting isn't open to—" "It's all right, Sophia," I reassured her. "I'm expected." I continued past her toward the glass-walled boardroom where several members had already gathered. Daniel was at the head of the table, reviewing documents with intense focus. He didn't look up when I entered. "Mrs. Morgan," Kevin announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Welcome." Daniel's head snapped up, his expression cycling rapidly, from surprise to confusion to irritation. "Becca, what are you doing here?" His eyes flicked to Kevin. "We're about to start a board meeting." "I know," I replied calmly. "That's why I'm here." Daniel laughed, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Honey, this is a closed board meeting. We're discussing confidential matters." "I'm aware of the agenda, Daniel. The vote on selling the AI division." The room had gone quiet, other board members watching our exchange with growing interest. Daniel stood, coming around the table toward me, his voice dropping to a forced whisper. "I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this is inappropriate. We can talk at home later." I held my ground. "I'm not here as your wife, Daniel. I'm here as the representative of Phoenix Ventures, which now holds majority ownership of Skyline Technologies." The silence in the room deepened. Daniel stared at me, incomprehension written across his features. "What are you talking about?" Kevin cleared his throat. "It's true, Daniel. Mrs. Morgan has provided documentation confirming Phoenix Ventures' acquisition of 51% of Skyline's shares. As such, she has the right to be present for this meeting and all future board deliberations." Daniel's face flushed. Red. "This is ridiculous. Some kind of joke." He turned to me, his voice hardening. "Becca, I don't know what game you're playing." "It's not a game," I interrupted, opening my briefcase and withdrawing the documents Eleanor had prepared. "These confirm Phoenix Ventures' position, and as the majority shareholder, I'm exercising my right to vote against the proposed sale of the AI division." Daniel snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with growing agitation. "This can't be legal," he muttered, echoing Kevin's earlier sentiment. "I assure you it is," I said. "Every acquisition was conducted legally through public markets." Daniel looked up, his expression now thunderous. "You went behind my back, bought shares in my company without telling me." His voice was dangerously low. "How? Where did you even get the capital for something like this?" I met his gaze steadily. "My inheritance, my investments, First Summit Capital's backing." I paused. "And the leverage of 23 patents that are still in my name. Patents that form the core of Skyline's technology." The color drained from Daniel's face. In that moment, I could see him mentally reviewing all the decisions he'd made over the years, all the details he'd dismissed as unimportant while focusing on his grand vision. The patent registrations had been one of those details, a technicality. He hadn't bothered to update after the company went public. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I already have," I replied. "But this isn't about taking something from you, Daniel. It's about preventing you from making a catastrophic mistake." I gestured to the boardroom table. "Shall we proceed with the meeting? I have an alternative proposal to present." For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might storm out or demand the meeting be postponed. Instead, he drew himself up, professional mask clicking back into place, though I could see the fury simmering beneath. "By all means," he said coldly, returning to his seat at the head of the table. The meeting that followed was tense but productive. I presented the same analysis I had shown Kevin and Jason earlier, outlining the risks of the Asian expansion and the strategic importance of the AI division. Most of the board members were initially skeptical, These were Daniel's people, after all, chosen for their alignment with his vision. But the data was compelling, and Jason's support lent crucial credibility to my presentation. Daniel remained silent throughout, his jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving me as I dismantled his strategy point by point. When I finished, Kevin called for discussion, and gradually, the tone in the room shifted. Questions about the expansion. Timeline gave way to concerns about overextension. Doubts about market readiness emerged. The tide was turning. When the final vote came, the decision was unanimous. The AI division would remain intact, and the Asian expansion would be reconsidered. With a more conservative approach, even Daniel, recognizing the inevitable, voted with the board. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, many nodding respectfully to me as they passed. Daniel remained seated, staring at the papers in front of him. "If you'll excuse us," I said to Kevin, who lingered by the door. "My husband and I need to talk." Kevin nodded and closed the door behind him, leaving Daniel and me alone in the boardroom. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 15 years of marriage and the seismic shift that had just occurred. "Why?" Daniel finally asked, his voice strangely hollow. "Why go to these lengths? If you had concerns about the company direction, why not just talk to me?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of his question. "I tried, Daniel. For years, I tried. Every time I offered an opinion on Skyline's strategy, you dismissed it. Every time I suggested the AI division needed more investment, not less, you patted my head and reminded me how long I'd been out of the business world. So this was revenge?" he demanded, anger flaring again. "For not listening to you?" "No," I said quietly. "This was protection. For the company. For my work. For my self-respect." I paused. "When did you stop seeing me as your partner? Daniel, when did I become just the woman who makes sure you have clean shirts for meetings?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable at having his words thrown back at him. "That was just something I said to those investors. It didn't mean anything." "But it did," I countered. "It was the truth of how you see me. Just a housewife. Not the woman who helped you build Skyline's foundation. Not the financial strategist who structured your first major deals. Certainly not someone whose opinion on business matters could possibly have value." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "I never meant to make you feel that way. Intentions don't matter as much as patterns, Daniel, and your pattern has been crystal clear." I gathered my papers, tucking them back into my briefcase. "I've scheduled another meeting tomorrow with the executive team to discuss the refocused strategy. I expect you to be there." He looked up sharply. "You're dictating my schedule now?" "I'm expecting the CEO to be present for a strategy discussion," I corrected. "That's you, Daniel. I have no intention of changing that, as long as you're willing to work within the new direction the board has approved." "And if I'm not?" he challenged. I met his gaze steadily. "Then we'll have a different conversation." The implication was clear. His position was no longer guaranteed. As majority shareholder, I had the power to recommend his replacement to the board. It was a power I had no desire to use, but Daniel needed to understand that the dynamics had fundamentally changed. "You should go home and think about what you want," I said, standing to leave, "both professionally and personally." He looked up at me, and for an instant, I glimpsed something vulnerable beneath the anger. Confusion, perhaps, or the dawning realization of how thoroughly he had underestimated me. "Where will you be?" "I've booked a hotel for tonight. I think we both need some space to process this." In truth, I had reserved the hotel room weeks ago, anticipating that returning home with Daniel after today's events would be impossible. I needed neutral ground, time to think about what came next, not just for Skyline, but for our marriage. I left him sitting there, still looking somewhat shell-shocked, and made my way through the executive floor. Employees glanced at me with newfound curiosity. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and I had no doubt that by morning, everyone at Skyline would know about Phoenix Ventures and the board's reversal on the division sale. Megan was waiting for me in the lobby, trying and failing to look casual as she flipped through a company brochure. When she saw me, her eyes widened in question. "It's done," I said simply. She exhaled, a grin spreading across her face. "And?" The board voted unanimously to keep the AI division and reconsider the expansion timeline. Megan let out a quiet whoop of triumph, drawing curious glances from the receptionist. "Sorry," she stage whispered, then linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the exit. "And Daniel?" I sighed. In shock, I think. Angry, confused. I pushed through the revolving door into the crisp autumn air. He genuinely doesn't understand why I did it. He sees it as a betrayal, not a correction. "Are you surprised?" Megan asked gently. I shook my head. "No, but I am sad." And I was sad for the partnership we had once had, for the man Daniel had been before success warped his perspective, for the years I had spent diminishing myself to avoid threatening his ego. "What now?" Megan asked as we reached her car. It was the question I had been asking myself since the moment the acquisition went through. What did I want, now that I had reclaimed my power? Was it enough to save the AI division? To force Daniel? To acknowledge my contributions? Or was there something more I needed? "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I need to figure out if there's anything left to salvage. In the company. In the marriage." Megan squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide." "I'm here, we all are." I checked into the Harborview Hotel, the same venue where Daniel had dismissed me as just a housewife less than 24 hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I requested a room overlooking the harbor, wanting to see the water, to be reminded of things larger and more enduring than corporate takeovers and marital discord. As evening fell, I ordered room service and opened my laptop, reviewing the presentation I planned to give to the executive team tomorrow. This was the constructive part of my plan, not just stopping Daniel's mistake, but charting a better course forward. The AI division would now become Skyline's priority, with increased investment and a clear development roadmap. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the evening. Daniel, alternating between angry texts demanding explanations and plaintive messages, asking when I was coming home, colleagues who had heard rumors and wanted confirmation, business reporters who had somehow caught wind of the shakeup and were seeking comments. I responded to none of them. Tonight was for me, for quiet reflection on the magnitude of what I had accomplished and the uncertain path ahead. Around 9, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Eleanor, holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "I thought you might need company," she said, her expression gentle. Victories can be lonely things. I stepped aside to let her in, grateful for her presence. Eleanor had been more than a mentor through this process. She had been my anchor, reminding me of who I was when I began to doubt myself. She poured the champagne and handed me a glass. "To Phoenix Rising," she toasted. I smiled at the reference. To the holding company name. My private joke, my personal symbolism. To rebirth from the ashes, I agreed. We sat by the window, watching the harbor lights shimmer on the water. Eleanor didn't press me for details about the board meeting or ask about Daniel. She simply provided quiet companionship, understanding that I needed to process the day's events at my own pace. Finally, I spoke. "I keep thinking about that moment at the gala, when he called me just a housewife. How confident he was, how casually cruel." I swirled the champagne in my glass. And I wonder if I would have gone through with this if he hadn't said those words, in that way, at that exact moment. Eleanor considered this. Some catalysts burn fast and hot. They force change that might otherwise take years. She looked at me carefully. But the underlying conditions were already there, Becca. The dismissal, the devaluation, the decisions made without consideration for your stake in the outcome. I know, I sighed. I just can't help wondering when it happened. When the man who once valued my mind above all else became someone who could dismiss me so completely. Power changes people, Eleanor said simply. Not always for the better. She set down her glass. The question now is what kind of power you want to be. I understood what she was asking. Would I use my newfound control to punish Daniel, to exact revenge for years of diminishment? Or would I choose a different path? I want to build, not destroy, I said after a moment. I always have. Eleanor smiled, satisfied with my answer. Then you'll need to decide whether Daniel can build with you, or if you need to continue alone. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? Not just the future of Skyline, but the future of my marriage. Could Daniel accept this new reality? Could he see me as an equal again? Did I even want him to try? One step at a time, I murmured, more to myself than to Eleanor. Tomorrow, we focus on the company. Personal reckonings can... Wait. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Wise approach? She stood to leave, pausing at the door. Remember, Becca, you've already won the war. How you make peace is up to you. After she left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the city lights and thinking about choices, the ones I had made and the ones still to come. Just 24 hours, I had transformed from just a housewife to the majority shareholder of a multi-million-dollar technology company. I had reclaimed not just my voice, but my vision for the future. The question now was what that future would look like, and who would share it with me. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, his messages now shifting from anger to something more reflective. I never saw it coming, he wrote. You outmaneuvered me completely. I should be furious, but I'm also impressed. The Becca I married is still in there after all. That was the problem, wasn't it? The Becca he married had never left. She had been there all along, watching, learning, growing, while he slowly stopped seeing her. I didn't respond to his message. Tomorrow would be soon. Enough for words. Tonight was for silence, for strength, for the quiet certainty that whatever came next, I would face it not as Daniel Morgan's wife, but as Rebecca Morgan, architect of my own restoration. Morning arrived with a pale, wintry light filtering through the hotel curtains. I had slept surprisingly well, perhaps because for the first time in years I had acted instead of reacted. I had chosen my path instead of accommodating Daniel's. The uncertainty of what lay ahead didn't frighten me. It energized me. I ordered breakfast to my room and reviewed my notes for the executive meeting while watching the early harbor traffic. From my window, fishing boats and cargo ships moved purposefully across the water, each with its own destination, its own mission. I felt a kinship with them this morning, deliberate, determined, charting my own course. My phone chimed with a message from Jason. Executive team assembled in conference room A9 mod AM. Everyone's here. Everyone would include Daniel, of course. I wondered what version of my husband I would encounter this morning. The cold, angry man from yesterday's board meeting, or the more reflective person who had texted me last night, or perhaps someone else entirely. Daniel had always been adaptable in business situations, quick to recalibrate his approach when necessary. Would he apply that same adaptability to our new dynamic? I dressed with care in a charcoal gray suit with subtle burgundy accents, professional but confident, a visual statement that I belonged in the executive suite. No more designer dresses chosen to complement Daniel's attire, no more playing the corporate wife. Today I was stepping fully into my own identity as a business leader. The Skyline Technologies headquarters seemed different as I entered, as though the building itself had shifted around me. Employees nodded respectfully, some offering hesitant smiles. News had spread quickly, it seemed. I was no longer just Mrs. Morgan, the CEO's wife who occasionally visited. I was a power in my own right. Sophia intercepted me in the lobby, her usual professional demeanor tinged with uncertainty. Mrs. Morgan, Ms. I'm not sure. What to call you now? Becca is fine, Sophia, I said kindly. She had always been efficient and respectful, even when Daniel wasn't. Mr. Morgan asked if you would see him briefly before the executive meeting, she said, her eyes darting nervously toward the elevators. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until the meeting started. Where is he? In his office. I nodded. Please tell the executive team I'll be there at 9 as scheduled. Daniel's office occupied the northeast corner of the executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering dramatic views of the harbor and the city skyline. It had been designed to impress, to communicate power and success to anyone who entered. I had helped select the furnishings years ago, when Skyline first moved to this building. The imposing mahogany desk, the leather chairs, the carefully curated art. I knocked once and entered without waiting for a response, a small assertion of my new authority. Daniel was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the harbor view that matched my hotel room's perspective, from the opposite shore. He turned as I entered, and I was struck by how tired he looked. The usual polish, the confident CEO persona he wore so comfortably, had slipped, revealing something more human underneath. You came, he said simply. You asked, I replied, remaining near the door. What do you need, Daniel? The executive meeting starts soon. He gestured to one of the visitor chairs. Please sit. Just for a minute. I hesitated, then crossed the room and sat. Not because he had asked, but because I chose to hear what he had to say. The distinction mattered. To me. Daniel didn't return to his seat behind the desk. Instead, he perched on the edge of the desk, a less formal position that subtly acknowledged the shift in our power dynamic. I didn't sleep last night, he began. I kept thinking about what happened, trying to understand how we got here. He looked directly at me. How I missed this completely. How my wife orchestrated a takeover of my company right under my nose. Our company, I corrected quietly. And I wasn't under your nose, Daniel. I was right beside you, speaking up about the AI division for months. You chose not to listen. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the point. Fair enough. I wasn't listening. He paused. Last night, after you left, I went through some old files, found the original research papers for the core algorithm. Your name was on all of them, just like Jason said. I said nothing. The truth of my contributions wasn't new. It had always been there in black and white for anyone who cared to look. I convinced myself that your stepping back from the company was your choice, Daniel continued, that you preferred running our home, managing our social life. It was convenient to believe that. Convenient because it meant you didn't have to share credit? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Or convenient because it meant you didn't have to consult me on business decisions? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Both, probably. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our early days, when he was stressed about Skyline's initial funding round. I got used to being the sole decision-maker, to being the visionary everyone looked to. And I enabled. That, I acknowledged. I stepped back. I played the supportive wife. I smoothed your path in 1,000 small ways that you never saw. Daniel nodded slowly. And then you stopped. I stopped when you were about to sell off my life's work without even consulting. Me? I said, an edge creeping into my voice despite my best efforts. I stopped when I realized you had come to see me as nothing more than a domestic convenience. He flinched slightly at that. That night at the gala, what I said to those investors was merely the clearest expression of something you'd been communicating for years, I finished for him. Just a housewife. Silence stretched between us, filled with 15 years of shared history. The early struggles when Skyline was just an idea, the gradual success, the subtle shifts in our relationship as Daniel's star rose and my professional identity receded. The executive team is waiting, I said finally, standing. What was it you wanted to tell me, Daniel? He straightened, professional mask clicking back into place, though his eyes remained troubled. I wanted you to know that I won't oppose the new direction. I'll support the retention of the AI division and the revised expansion timeline. It was a professional concession, not a personal one, an acknowledgement of my business victory rather than an apology for years of dismissal. Still, it was something. Thank you, I said. That will make the transition smoother for everyone. Is that what this is? He asked. A transition. The question hung in the air between us, layered with meaning. Was this a transition for Skyline? For our marriage? For our identities? Yes, I said simply. I think it is. The executive meeting was held in Skyline's largest conference room, a space usually reserved for client presentations and all-hands meetings. The company's 10 senior executives were already seated around the table when I arrived, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to carefully masked hostility. Daniel entered just behind me, but didn't take his usual seat at the head of the table. Instead, he chose a chair midway down the right side, a deliberate gesture that did not go unnoticed by the others. I took a position near the front of the room but didn't sit, signaling that I would be leading the presentation. Thank you all for being here, I began. I realize yesterday's board decision has raised many questions about Skyline's direction. Going forward, that's why I wanted to meet with you directly. I launched into my presentation, outlining the revised strategy that would now prioritize the AI division's development while taking a more measured approach to international expansion. The data was compelling. Market analyses, competitors' positions, technological development timelines, projected ROI on various initiatives. This wasn't an emotional appeal or a power grab. It was sound business strategy. Throughout the presentation, I was conscious of Daniel watching me, his expression unreadable. The other executives shifted from skepticism to reluctant interest as the depth of my analysis became clear. I wasn't just the CEO's wife who had mysteriously acquired controlling shares. I was someone who understood Skyline's business intimately and had a concrete vision for its future. When I finished, I opened the floor for questions. There was a moment of awkward silence, the executives glancing at Daniel, unsure of the new hierarchy, before Marcus Chen, the VP of Product Development, spoke up. The AI development timeline you're proposing is aggressive, he noted. We've been working with limited resources in that department since the focus shifted to the Asian expansion. I nodded. I understand. Part of the revised strategy includes reallocating resources back to the AI team. I'd like to review your current staffing and needs after this meeting. Marcus looked surprised but pleased. His team had been among those most affected by the shift away from domestic innovation toward international expansion. More questions followed, detailed, technical inquiries about implementation timelines, budget reallocations, client communications. I answered each one directly, drawing on my intimate knowledge of Skyline's operations and the research I had conducted over the past months. With each response, I could feel the room's energy shift, skepticism giving way to a cautious respect. Throughout it all, Daniel remained silent, neither supporting nor challenging my presentations. The other executives noticed, of course. His silence was itself a statement. Whether it communicated acceptance or merely a strategic retreat remained to be seen. As the meeting concluded, I addressed the unspoken question hanging in the air. I know this represents a significant shift in direction, and that change can be unsettling. But I want to be clear, This isn't about replacing leadership. It's about refocusing our priorities on what has always made Skyline strong: technological innovation and solving real problems for our clients. I glanced at Daniel, offering him an opening. Daniel and I are aligned on this new direction. We'll be working together to ensure a smooth transition. Daniel nodded almost imperceptibly, neither confirming nor contradicting my statement. The executives exchanged glances, processing this new reality. Then Lisa Townsend, the chief marketing officer and one of Daniel's most loyal supporters, voiced what many were likely thinking. So, what exactly is the structure now? Who reports to whom? It was a fair question, if bluntly stated. The corporate hierarchy had been clear yesterday. Today, it was ambiguous. Daniel was still CEO, but I controlled the company. The power dynamics were fluid, undefined. For day-to-day operations, the reporting structure remains unchanged, I said. Daniel continues as CEO. I'll be taking an active role as the representative of Phoenix Ventures, focusing initially on the AI division's development. I paused. Think of it as adding expertise, not replacing it. It was a diplomatic answer, designed to preserve Daniel's authority while establishing my own. Whether this arrangement would work in practice remained to be seen, but it gave the executive team a framework to operate within until more permanent structures could be established. As the executives filed out, several lingered to speak with me privately, asking more detailed questions about the strategy, offering support, or simply introducing themselves more formally. I noted who approached and who avoided me, mentally, cataloging allies and skeptics. Daniel remained seated until the room had cleared, then stood and approached. "Well handled," he said, his tone professionally cordial. They seem cautiously on board. "They're professionals," I replied. "They'll adapt to the new direction." "And us?" he asked, his voice lower. "How do we adapt?" It was the personal question lurking beneath our professional interaction, the one neither of us had fully addressed. What did yesterday's power shift mean for our marriage? Could we find a new equilibrium, or had the foundation been irreparably damaged? "I don't know yet," I admitted. "This is uncharted territory for both of us." He nodded slowly. "Will you come home tonight? Not to resolve everything, just to talk properly." I considered his request. Part of me wanted to maintain the separation, to process everything from the neutral space of the hotel. But another part recognized that avoiding difficult conversations wouldn't lead to resolution, whatever form that resolution might take. "All right," I agreed. "I'll come home tonight." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of meetings, with the AI division team, with finance to discuss budget reallocations, with legal to review the implications of Phoenix Ventures' majority ownership. I stepped fully into my new role, not as Daniel's wife but as a business leader in my own right. It was exhausting but exhilarating. As I moved through the day, I felt myself reconnecting with parts of my identity that had been dormant for too long. My strategic thinking, my technical knowledge, my ability to inspire and direct teams. These aspects of myself hadn't disappeared during my years as just a housewife. They had simply been channeled into other arenas. Now they were flowing back into their original course, like a river returning to its natural bed after years of diversion. By late afternoon, word of my presentation had spread throughout the company. Employees who had never spoken to me before found reasons to introduce themselves in the hallways. A junior programmer stopped me outside the AI division offices, nervously explaining how my original algorithm had inspired her graduate research. "I didn't know you were the one who developed it," she admitted. "The documentation only lists D. Morgan as the creator." It was a small thing, perhaps, a credit line in technical documentation, but it symbolized so much about how my contributions had been gradually erased, absorbed into Daniel's narrative of sole creation. "We'll need to update those documents," I said with a smile. Historical accuracy matters. As the workday wound down, I found myself in the strange position of preparing to return to my own home as if it were an uncertain destination. I packed my overnight bag in the hotel room, checking out with the possibility that I might return tomorrow, depending on how the evening went. Eleanor called as I was getting into my car. "How was the executive meeting?" "Productive," I replied. "No open rebellion, at least. Some are skeptical, others relieved." "And Daniel?" I sighed. "Professional in public, reserved. We haven't really talked about everything. I'm going home tonight to have that conversation." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Be clear about what you want, Becca. Not just for Skyline, but for yourself." That was the heart of it, wasn't it? What did I want? The past few months had been focused on stopping Daniel's mistake, on protecting the AI division, on reclaiming my voice in the company I had helped build. But now that those immediate goals had been accomplished, what did I want for the future? "I'll try," I promised. The drive home to Beacon Hill was strange, both familiar and disorienting. This was the route I had driven thousands of times over. The years, the neighborhood where we had built our life together. Yet something had fundamentally changed. I was returning not as Daniel's wife, but as something more complex. Business rival, company savior, equal partner? The role was still being defined. Our townhouse was quiet when I arrived, the evening shadows stretching across the brick facade. Daniel's car was in the driveway, but the house had a stillness about it, as though it too was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I used my key, entering the front hall with the strange sensation of being both at home and not at home. The familiar scents, Daniel's preferred sandalwood candles, the lemon polish on the antique side, table, the subtle hint of lavender from the fresh flowers I always kept in the entryway, washed over me, bringing with them a cascade of memories. Daniel appeared in the doorway to the living room, casual now in jeans and a sweater. Without his business armor, he looked more like the man I had married, less the corporate titan, more the brilliant but vulnerable programmer who had once worked 18-hour days on our initial product, falling asleep at his keyboard while I brought him coffee and helped debug his code. "You came," he said, echoing his words from this morning. "I said I would." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, 15 years of marriage suddenly insufficient preparation for this conversation. Then Daniel gestured toward the kitchen. "I made dinner," he said. "Nothing fancy. Just that pasta with sun-dried tomatoes you like." It was an olive branch of sorts. Daniel rarely cooked, and when he did, it was usually elaborate dishes designed to impress guests rather than simple meals for just the two of us. This was a different kind of effort. "Thank you," I said, setting down my bag. "That sounds nice." The kitchen island was set for two, wine already poured, a small arrangement of flowers in the center. Daniel had made an effort to create a neutral, even pleasant environment for our conversation. I appreciated the gesture while recognizing its limitations. Beautiful settings couldn't erase painful realities. We ate in relative silence at first, exchanging only the most basic observations about the food, the weather, neutral topics that required no emotional engagement. Daniel seemed to be waiting for me to initiate the real conversation, while I was still gathering my thoughts, trying to articulate what I needed to say. Finally, as we finished eating, Daniel set down his fork and looked at me directly. "I spent most of today thinking about what happened to us," he said quietly. "How we went from partners to whatever we are now." I took a sip of wine, considering his words. "We didn't just wake up here, Daniel. This has been years in the making." He nodded slowly. "I know. That's what I've been thinking about." He paused. "When did it start for you? When did you begin to feel diminished?" It was a surprisingly insightful question. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even anger, not this quiet inquiry into my experience. I took a moment to consider how to answer truthfully. It was gradual, I said finally. Little things at first, the way you stopped consulting me on business decisions, the way you began to introduce me at functions as my wife Becca, rather than Becca Morgan, who developed our core algorithm. The way my suggestions in private began to resurface in meetings as your ideas. Daniel winced slightly, but didn't interrupt. But I think the turning point was Emma's fourth-grade science fair, I continued. She had created that project on algorithmic prediction, remember? She was so excited to show you. You looked at it for maybe 30 seconds, made some comment about it being cute, and then took a business call. Later that night, I heard you on the phone with Kevin, talking about how domestic life isn't intellectually stimulating, and how you needed the challenge of the business world. I could see the memory register in Daniel's expression, not of the science fair itself, which I doubted he remembered clearly, but of the sentiment I had described, the casual dismissal of family life as inferior to his corporate pursuits. I realized then that you had created this false division, I said. Business was serious, important, challenging. Home was trivial, simple, beneath your full attention. And since I had become associated with home in your mind, I too had become less worthy of serious consideration. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, absorbing my words. I never thought of it that way, he finally said. But you're right. I did start to compartmentalize. Work became where I expressed my ambition, my intelligence. Home became somewhere else. Somewhere I didn't have to think too hard. And I became someone you didn't have to listen to, I added quietly. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. Yet, all this time, you were watching, analyzing, planning. The takeover didn't happen overnight. No, I agreed. But it wouldn't have happened at all if you hadn't moved to sell the AI division. That was the line I couldn't let you cross. Because it was your work, he said. Because it was the right direction for the company, I corrected. My personal connection to it mattered, yes. But this wasn't just about ego, Daniel. It was about preventing a strategic error that would have damaged everything we built. He studied me for a moment. You really believe that, don't you? That this was about the company, not about us. It was about both, I admitted. I couldn't separate them anymore. The way you treated me personally and the way you dismissed my input professionally were two sides of the same coin. Daniel reached for his wine glass, turning it slowly in his hands. So where does that leave us? As business associates? As co-leaders of Skyline? As husband and wife? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want our relationship to be now? In this new reality where I had reclaimed my power, but upended the foundation of our marriage in the process? I don't know, I said honestly. I know I want respect, professionally and personally. I know I want acknowledgement of my contributions, past and future. I know I want a voice in the direction of the company I helped create. I paused. Whether those things are compatible with our marriage as it has been, that's less clear to me. As it has been, Daniel repeated thoughtfully. What if it could be different? What if we could find our way back to being true partners again? The question hung in the air between us, full of possibility and uncertainty. Could we rebuild what had been broken? Did we want to? Or was it time to accept that we had grown in different directions, that the people we had become might not fit together the way we once had? I don't know if that's possible, I said softly. But I think it starts with honesty, with seeing each other. Clearly, not just the convenient versions we've created. Daniel nodded slowly. I think you're right. He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but leaving his own open, an invitation rather than a demand. Can we try? Not to go back to how things were, but to find something new, something true? I looked at his outstretched hand, at the man I had once loved enough to set aside my own ambitions for, at the complicated future that lay ahead of us, professionally and personally. The easy answer would be to walk away, to make a clean break. But real life was rarely so neat, so binary. There were gradients, nuances, possibilities between the extremes. I think, I said carefully, that depends on what happens next. On whether what changed yesterday was just ownership of the company or something deeper about how we see each other. The next morning dawned with the soft patter of rain against our bedroom window. Daniel and I had talked late into the night, circling through years of accumulated hurts and misunderstandings, ending not with resolution, but with exhaustion. We had slept in the same bed but with a careful distance between us, physical space, that mirrored the emotional terrain we were still navigating. I woke first, watching the gray light filter through the curtains, listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me. There was something surreal about the domesticity of the moment, juxtaposed with the seismic shifts in our professional relationship. 24 hours ago, I had been in a hotel room, strategizing my next move as the new controlling shareholder of Skyline. Now I was back in our marital bed, preparing to begin a workday that would redefine everything. I slipped out of bed quietly, showered and dressed in a deep blue suit that had hung unworn in my closet for months, purchased on a whim during a rare shopping trip with Megan, who had insisted I needed power clothes even if I wasn't working. Professionally. "You never know when you might need armor," she had said. How prescient that had turned out to be. In the kitchen, I started coffee and checked my email. Messages had poured in overnight, from board members seeking private conversations, from Eleanor with suggestions for next steps, from Jason with updates on the finance team's reaction to the new direction, from industry contacts who had somehow already heard about the ownership change. The business world moved quickly. News of Phoenix Ventures' acquisition of Skyline was spreading through professional networks, generating speculation and interest. I would need to address the public narrative soon, to shape the story before rumors and assumptions took root. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when Daniel appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work in one of his customary tailored suits. The polished CEO was back, though something in his eyes remained unresolved, vulnerable. "You're up early," he said, moving to the coffee pot. "Lot to do today," I replied. "Financial press has already picked up the ownership change. We need to control the narrative." Daniel nodded, professional mask sliding into place. "I've already had calls from the Wall Street Journal and TechCrunch. I held them off for now, but we should coordinate our response." The "we" registered with me, a small acknowledgement that we were now, by necessity if not by choice, partners again in Skyline's future. "I think we need to present a united front," I said. "Not just for the press, but for the company itself. Whatever is happening between us personally, Skyline needs stable leadership." "Agreed." Daniel hesitated, then added, "How do you want to position your role publicly? Board member? Strategic advisor?" It was a reasonable question, but also a loaded one. How did I want to identify myself now? After years of being introduced as Daniel's wife, how did I want the world to see me? "Co-founder," I said firmly. That's what I always was, even if it wasn't reflected in the official narrative. It's time to correct the record. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded. "Co-founder," he repeated. "I'll have PR draft a statement for our review." We finished breakfast in a silence that was neither comfortable nor overtly hostile, a business breakfast between colleagues with a complicated history. As we prepared to leave, moving around each other in the familiar dance of a long-married couple gathering keys, phones, briefcases, the strangeness of our situation struck me again. We were simultaneously intimates and adversaries, bound together by both personal and professional ties that were now being redefined by the hour. Separate cars? Daniel asked, pausing at the door. It was a simple question that carried more weight than it should have. Would we arrive together, presenting a united front from the start? Or separately, emphasizing our individual identities? I think separate makes sense, I said after a moment. I have a few stops to make this morning. He nodded, accepting this small declaration of independence without comment. I'll see you at the office then. My first stop was Eleanor's apartment in Back Bay. I had texted her earlier, and she was waiting with fresh pastries and a keen analytical mind ready to help me navigate the day ahead. How was it? She asked as I settled into her breakfast nook, the rain pattering softly against the bay windows that overlooked Commonwealth Avenue. Complicated, I admitted. We talked for hours. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. No resolution yet, but acknowledgement, at least, of what went wrong, of how we got here. Eleanor nodded, pouring me tea from an elegant silver pot. And professionally? How will you handle the public transition? I outlined the agreement Daniel and I had reached about presenting a united front, about my reclaiming the co-founder title that had always been rightfully mine. Good, Eleanor said approvingly. That establishes your historical claim to authority, not just your financial one through Phoenix Ventures. She stirred her tea thoughtfully. But be prepared for pushback. The business world doesn't easily accept narrative revisions. There will be those who see this as opportunistic revisionism rather than correction of an historical erasure. Let them, I said with more confidence than I entirely felt. The facts are on my side. The patents, the original code documentation, the early business plans, they all bear my name alongside Daniel's. If people want to dismiss that as revisionism, they'll need to dismiss the evidence too. Eleanor smiled, a flash of pride in her eyes. That's the Becca I taught. Now, let's talk strategy for today. The first 48 hours of a transition like this are critical. You've established authority with the board and executive team. Now you need to solidify it throughout the organization. We spent the next hour mapping out priorities, which teams I should connect with directly, which initiatives I should visibly champion, how to balance asserting my authority without undermining Daniel's position as CEO. It was a delicate balance, but Eleanor had navigated similar transitions many times during her career in venture capital. Remember, she said as I prepared to leave, perception becomes reality quickly in corporate environments. If you act like a leader, confidently and consistently, people will accept you as one. Hesitation invites challenge. I arrived at Skyline's headquarters mid-morning. The lobby had a different energy today, a buzz of curiosity and speculation that quieted momentarily as I entered, then resumed with greater intensity as I crossed to the elevators. I caught fragments of whispered conversations, saw employees watching me with new interest. Yesterday's revelation was still reverberating through the company culture. Sophia was waiting when I stepped off the elevator on the executive floor. Good morning, Mrs. Morgan. Becca, she corrected herself quickly. Mr. Morgan asked me to show you to your new office when you arrived. My new office? This was unexpected. I followed Sophia down the hallway past Daniel's corner office to a large room that had previously been a small conference space. The transformation was remarkable. A sleek desk positioned to take advantage of the harbor view, modern art on the walls, comfortable seating arranged for meetings, even fresh flowers in a simple glass vase. Mr. Morgan had it prepared overnight, Sophia explained. He said you would need a proper workspace. I stepped into the space, absorbing its significance. This wasn't a temporary accommodation or a symbolic gesture. This was a permanent office for a permanent executive. Whatever doubts Daniel might harbor personally about our new arrangement, professionally he was acknowledging my ongoing role. Thank you, Sophia, I said. It's perfect. Your schedule has been updated in the system, she continued, all professional efficiency. The PR team has requested time at 11 WAS to discuss the press release. The AI division heads would like to meet at 1, and Mr. Reynolds from finance has asked for 30 minutes whenever is convenient. It was surreal, stepping into an executive schedule as though I had always had one, as though yesterday's dramatic revelations were simply a normal career progression, rather than a seismic disruption of the status quo. 11 works for the PR team, I confirmed. I'd like to push the AI meeting to 2 if possible and tell Jason I can see him at 4 WOW. Sophia nodded, making notes on her tablet. Will you be joining the executive lunch today? It's a standing meeting on Wednesdays. Another decision point. Would I integrate myself into the existing executive rhythms or establish separate ones? I thought of Eleanor's advice about acting like a leader from the start. Yes, I said decisively. I'll be there. As Sophia left to adjust schedules, I took a moment to center myself in this new space, this new role. The office window framed a view of Boston Harbor similar to the one from my hotel room yesterday, but from a different angle, a different perspective, much like my new view of Skyline itself. My phone chimed with a text from Megan. How's day 2 of the revolution going? Lunch later? I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support throughout this transformation. Rain check on lunch, already booked with executive team. Dinner instead? Her reply came immediately. Absolutely. My place 7:30. I'll open wine and you can tell me everything. The morning proceeded in a whirlwind of meetings and introductions. The PR team arrived at 11:01 sharp, nervously presenting a draft press release that delicately balanced acknowledging my historical role as co-founder while maintaining Daniel's position as CEO. It was well-crafted but cautious, too cautious for my taste. This reads like an afterthought, I said, highlighting a particularly tepid paragraph. As though my involvement with Skyline is some recent development, not a foundational fact. Let's be more direct. I dictated revisions that left no ambiguity about my historical contributions and my current authority. The PR director, a polished woman named Vanessa, whom Daniel had hired from a major tech firm last year, watched me with growing respect as I edited. Much stronger, she agreed when I finished, though Mr. Morgan may want to soften some of the language. Mr. Morgan and I will review it together, I assured her, but the essential facts need to be clear. I am not a new arrival at Skyline. I am returning to a company I helped create. After the PR team left, I spent time familiarizing myself with recent reports and analyses. I had done extensive research during the takeover planning, but there were operational details I needed to better understand before meeting with various teams. I was deep in a quarterly analysis of the AI division's resource allocation when a soft knock interrupted me. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I see you've settled in, he observed, glancing around the office. Yes, thank you for arranging it, I replied. It's exactly what I need. He nodded, stepping inside but not sitting down. PR sent me the revised release. Your revisions were substantial. They were necessary, I said simply. The original draft minimized my historical role. Daniel didn't argue the point directly. The board will need to review it before it goes out. There are governance implications to how we frame your position. Of course, I agreed. But the basic facts aren't negotiable, Daniel. I was there at the beginning. The patents and original documentation prove it. That's not a matter for board approval. It's simply reality. He studied me for a moment, and I could see him recalibrating, adapting to this new dynamic where he could not simply overrule or dismiss me. You're right, he conceded finally. We'll work with your version as the baseline. He paused. Are you joining the executive lunch today? Yes, I confirmed. Sophia added it to my schedule. Something flickered across his face. Approval, resignation, or perhaps a mixture of both. Good. It will give the team a chance to interact with you in a less formal setting. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Kevin Parker has called an emergency board meeting for Friday. He says it's procedural given the ownership change, but it might be more than that, I finished for him. Daniel nodded. Kevin was one of my earliest supporters. He might be looking for ways to challenge the acquisition on technical grounds. This was valuable information, a potential ally warning me of a coming challenge. It was a small gesture, but significant. Whatever personal conflicts remained between us, Daniel was at least partially aligning himself with my position professionally. Thank you for the heads up, I said. I'll be prepared. The executive lunch was held in a private dining room at an upscale restaurant just across from Skyline's headquarters. It was clearly a well-established ritual. The staff knew the executives by name. Drink preferences were anticipated without orders being placed. The atmosphere one of comfortable familiarity. My arrival disrupted that familiar pattern, introducing a new element that no one quite knew how to integrate. Daniel handled it smoothly, gesturing to the empty chair at his right, a position of respect that acknowledged my authority while maintaining his own. Becca will be joining our Wednesday lunches going forward, he announced as we settled in, his tone making it clear this was already decided, not up for discussion. The executives exchanged glances, adjusting to this new dynamic. Some, like Jason, seemed relieved by the apparent truce between Daniel and me. Others, particularly those who had been most closely aligned with Daniel's expansion strategy, appeared more reserved, watching cautiously to see how power would now flow between us. The conversation initially remained superficial. Market trends, industry gossip, safe topics that required no commitments or revelations. I observed more than I spoke, noting who deferred to whom, who controlled which aspects of the discussion, the subtle hierarchies that operated beneath the surface of Skyline's executive team. Gradually, as wine was poured and the initial awkwardness receded, the conversation turned to more substantive matters. Marcus Chen, the VP of Product Development, raised a question about the AI division's renewed priority status. If we're pivoting back to the AI focus, he asked, directing the question to both Daniel and me, an interesting choice in itself, how does that affect the development roadmap for the next quarter? Teams have already been allocated based on the expansion priorities. It was a legitimate operational concern, but also a test. Who would answer? Who held decision-making authority now? I glanced at Daniel, giving him the opportunity to take the lead as CEO. He nodded slightly, acknowledging my deference to his position. The immediate priority is stabilization, Daniel said. No drastic reallocations this quarter, but we'll be reviewing the roadmap in detail next week. He glanced at me. Becca will be leading that review, given her expertise in the AI architecture. It was a reasonable compromise, maintaining existing operations in the short term while signaling my authority over the strategic direction. I nodded in agreement. My goal isn't to disrupt ongoing work, I added. It's to ensure we're building on our strengths rather than diluting them. I'd like to meet with each of your teams individually over the next 2 weeks to understand current challenges before making any significant changes. The tension in the room eased slightly. Whatever they had expected, perhaps an immediate purge of Daniel's allies or dramatic restructuring, my measured approach offered reassurance. We might be changing direction, but we weren't driving the company off a cliff in the process. The remainder of the lunch proceeded smoothly, with conversations naturally breaking into smaller groups as the meal progressed. I found myself speaking with Lisa Townsend, the chief marketing officer who had challenged me directly in yesterday's meeting. I hope there are no hard feelings about yesterday, she said, her tone professional but guarded. Clarity on the reporting structure is essential for effective operations. Absolutely no hard feelings, I assured her. Your question was entirely appropriate, and to be honest, We're all still figuring out exactly how this new arrangement will work in practice. Lisa studied me thoughtfully. You know, I've been with Skyline for 7 years. In all that time, Daniel never mentioned you were involved in founding the company. He always presented himself as the sole creator. It was a blunt statement, almost a challenge, but I appreciated her directness. Yes, I'm aware of the narrative. That developed over time, I replied evenly. Correcting it is part of why I'm here now. Must have been difficult, she observed, watching from the sidelines as your contributions were erased. There was something in her tone, not quite empathy, but a certain recognition, that made me wonder about her own experiences in the male-dominated tech world. It was, I acknowledged, but I was complicit in my own erasure for a long time. I chose to step back, to support Daniel's public role while I focused on family. I just never expected that stepping back would evolve into being written out of the company's history entirely. Lisa nodded slowly. The price of accommodation is often invisibility, she said, a statement that suggested personal experience with similar dynamics. But you're certainly visible now. Yes, I agreed, and I intend to stay that way. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. Good. Skyline could use some fresh perspectives in the executive suite. For what it's worth, I always had reservations about the Asian expansion timeline. It felt rushed, driven more by ego than market readiness. It was a significant revelation, one of Daniel's seemingly loyal executives privately questioning his strategy. I filed this information away, recognizing a potential ally I hadn't anticipated. I'd love to hear more about your market assessment, I said. Perhaps we could meet later this week? I'd like that, Lisa agreed. By the time the lunch concluded, I had a clearer map of Skyline's executive landscape, who might support my vision, who remained firmly in Daniel's camp, and who was pragmatically adapting to the new power dynamics. It was valuable intelligence as I prepared for the emergency board meeting Kevin had called for Friday. The afternoon continued at a relentless pace, meetings with the AI division heads, who were cautiously excited about their renewed priority status, a session with Jason to review financial implications of the strategy shift, conversations with legal about governance changes resulting from Phoenix Ventures' majority ownership. Throughout it all, I was conscious of eyes watching, evaluating, measuring my authority against Daniel's. We were performing an elaborate corporate dance, establishing new patterns of leadership while trying to project stability to the organization. It was exhausting but necessary. The foundation we built now would determine Skyline's trajectory for years to come. By late afternoon, I was mentally drained but energized. This, the strategic thinking, the operational problem-solving, the leadership challenges, was what I had trained for, what I had excelled at before stepping back to support Daniel's career. Returning to it felt like rediscovering a part of myself that had been dormant but never truly gone. I was reviewing notes from the AI division meeting when my office phone rang. It was Sophia, her voice professionally neutral. Ms. Morgan, there's a Ms. Chen here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Megan, here at Skyline? This was unexpected. Megan had deliberately kept her distance from my professional world after I stepped back from my career, not wanting to navigate the awkwardness of being friends with the boss's wife. Her presence here now was significant. Please send her in, I said. Moments later, Megan appeared, dressed in her consultancy's signature style of structured blazer over a graphic t-shirt, projecting creative professionalism. She closed the door behind her, then broke into a wide grin. Look at you, she said, gesturing to my office, the harbor view, the executive trappings. Rebecca Morgan, corporate powerhouse. It suits you. I smiled, genuinely happy to see her. What brings you to Skyline? Our dinner isn't until tonight. Megan's expression turned more serious. That's actually why I'm here. I had a call from a reporter at Tech Insider about an hour ago. They're running a story tomorrow about Phoenix Ventures' acquisition of Skyline, with a focus on the domestic drama angle. She made air quotes around the phrase. They specifically asked me for comment as your friend. I frowned. What kind of comment? About the deterioration of your marriage, and whether it was the real motivation behind the takeover. Megan grimaced. They're framing it as a revenge story, Becca. Spurned wife seizes husband's company in corporate coup. I felt a flash of anger. It was exactly the kind of sexist, reductive narrative I had feared. One that diminished the legitimate business rationale behind my actions, recasting a strategic intervention as emotional vengeance. What did you tell them? I asked. Nothing, Megan assured me. I said I didn't comment on friends' personal lives, but they're running the story with or without input. They already have quotes from sources close to the company suggesting the takeover was motivated by marital problems. Daniel, I said automatically, then immediately regretted the assumption. No, that doesn't make sense. A story like that hurts him too. Makes him look like he lost control of his company because of personal issues. Megan nodded. Exactly. Which is why I'm thinking this came from someone else. Someone who wants to undermine both of you. The pieces clicked into place. Kevin Parker, I said. The board chair. Daniel warned me he might try to challenge the acquisition. This could be his opening move, poisoning the narrative before we can establish our own. That would be my guess, Megan agreed. So what's the counter strategy? You need to get ahead of this, Becca. Once it's framed as a domestic dispute, it's hard to reclaim the business narrative. She was right. If the story ran as described, it would undermine my authority, painting me as an emotional actor rather than a strategic one. It would also damage Skyline itself, suggesting leadership instability at a critical moment. I need to talk to Daniel, I said, reaching for my phone. We need to coordinate our response. Megan raised an eyebrow. You think he'll back you on this, even after everything that's happened? I paused, considering the question seriously. Would Daniel join forces with me against this external threat, or would he see it as an opportunity to regain leverage? Yesterday, I wouldn't have hesitated to assume the latter, but after our conversations last night and his small gestures of professional alignment today, I wasn't so certain. I think, I said slowly, that whatever is happening between us personally, neither of us wants to see Skyline damaged by tabloid-style coverage. This affects the company's stability, investor confidence, employee morale. Daniel understands that. I hope you're right, Megan said, her skepticism evident, because you're going to need a united front to combat this narrative effectively. I texted Daniel, need to speak urgently, issue with press coverage. My office? His response came almost immediately. On my way. When Daniel arrived minutes later, his expression shifted from concern to wariness upon seeing Megan. The two had a complicated history. Megan had never hidden her disapproval of how Daniel had gradually sidelined me professionally, and he had always regarded her as a disruptive influence. Megan, he acknowledged with a curt nod. I didn't realize you were involved in this. I'm not, she replied coolly. I'm just the messenger. A reporter contacted me trying to get dirt on your marriage for a story they're running tomorrow. Daniel's attention snapped to me. What story? I explained what Megan had told me, the framing of the acquisition as revenge for marital problems, the implication that personal drama rather than business strategy had driven the takeover. Daniel's face darkened as he listened. This is Kevin, he said when I finished, confirming my suspicion. It has his fingerprints all over it. He's always preferred back channels to direct confrontation. The question is how we respond, I said. If we do nothing, this becomes the dominant narrative. If we fight it separately, we risk contradicting each other and making it worse. Daniel paced the office, thinking through implications. We need to preempt it, he said finally. Release our official statement today, not tomorrow as planned. Frame this as a strategic realignment with full board knowledge, emphasizing your historical role as co-founder. And the personal aspect? I pressed. They're specifically targeting our marriage as the story. He stopped pacing, meeting my eyes directly. We present a united front, completely professional. We acknowledge that yes, you're my wife, but more relevantly, you're Skyline's co-founder reasserting your rightful role in the company's direction. It was the right approach, refocusing attention on the business relationship rather than the personal one. But it would require careful execution, perfect alignment between us in our messaging. We should do a joint interview, I suggested. Get ahead of the narrative with our own voice rather than just a press release. Vanessa knows an editor at the Business Journal, Daniel said, referring to our PR director. If we move quickly, we might be able to get something online by this evening, ahead of the Tech Insider piece. Megan, who had been quietly observing our exchange, nodded approvingly. That could work, but you'll need to be completely in sync. Any hint of tension or disagreement will only feed the personal drama angle. Daniel and I exchanged a look, acknowledging the challenge. We were still navigating our own complex feelings about recent events. Could we convincingly present ourselves as aligned leaders while our personal relationship remained unresolved? We can do this, I said with more confidence than I entirely felt. For Skyline's sake, if nothing else. Daniel nodded. I'll call. Vanessa, get her working on the interview immediately. As he stepped out to make the call, Megan moved closer, lowering her voice. Are you sure about this, Becca? You'll be linking yourself publicly to Daniel again, right when you've finally established your independent identity. It was a fair concern, one that had occurred to me as well. The joint interview strategy risked reinforcing the very narrative I had been fighting against, that I was defined primarily through my relationship to Daniel, rather than by my own accomplishments and vision. It's a calculated risk, I admitted. But right now, the greater danger is letting this revenge narrative take hold. Once we've established the legitimate business foundation for the acquisition, then we can gradually define our separate leadership, identities. Megan didn't look entirely convinced, but she squeezed my arm supportively. I trust your judgment. Just don't lose sight of what you've fought for these past months. Daniel returned, his expression focused, decisive. Vanessa is setting it up. The Business Journal can meet us at 5:30. We'll have copy approval before it goes live tonight. I glanced at my watch, barely an hour to prepare. We should align. On key messages, I said. Make sure we're emphasizing the same points. He nodded. My office. More space to work. As we prepared to leave, Megan gathered her things. I'll get out of your way. Still on for dinner later? I hesitated, looking at Daniel. The interview preparation and the actual conversation with the journalist would likely run into the evening. Beyond that, Daniel and I had more to discuss privately about our path forward, both professionally and personally. Rain check? I suggested apologetically. This needs my full attention right now. Megan nodded, understanding but concerned. Of course. Call me after, no matter how late. She gave Daniel a pointed look. Take care of her. She's been carrying a lot. It was as close to a truce as Megan would offer. Not quite approval, but an acknowledgement that Daniel and I were in this situation together, for better or worse. As we walked to Daniel's office to prepare for the interview, I felt the weight of the decision we had just made. We were choosing to present ourselves as a united leadership team, setting aside our personal conflicts for the sake of the company we had both helped build. Whether that unity was merely a professional facade or the beginning of a more meaningful reconciliation remained to be seen. What was clear was that our story, personal and professional, was still being written. Still, evolving in ways neither of us could fully predict. The true test would be whether we could forge a new kind of partnership from the broken pieces of the old one, whether respect, once lost, could truly be regained. The Business Journal's conference room felt oddly neutral territory, neither Skyline's domain nor mine, but a professional space where Daniel and I could present our united narrative. The journalist, Andrea Wells, was known for her insightful coverage of Boston's tech scene. She had followed Skyline's growth for years, occasionally interviewing Daniel about market trends or product launches, but had never spoken with me. Her surprise at meeting Mrs. Morgan in a professional capacity was barely concealed. "I had no idea you were involved with Skyline at the executive level," she admitted as we settled into our seats. "The company has always been presented as Daniel's creation." "That's actually the heart of what we want to discuss," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "The narrative around Skyline's founding and my role in it needs correction." Andrea's interest visibly sharpened. She glanced between Daniel and me, sensing the story beneath the story. "I'm all ears." For the next hour, we carefully constructed our public narrative. I outlined my technical background, my role in developing Skyline's core algorithm, my decision to step back from day-to-day operations after our daughter was born. Daniel, to his credit, directly acknowledged the gradual erasure of my contributions from the company's history. "It wasn't a deliberate decision to minimize Becca's role," he explained, choosing his words carefully. "It was more a case of simplifying the company's story over time. In retrospect, that was a significant oversight. An oversight that resulted in the co-founder being completely unknown to the business community," Andrea observed, her tone neutral but the implication clear. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. "Yes, and that's something we're now correcting." We explained Phoenix Ventures' acquisition as a strategic realignment rather than a hostile takeover, a necessary course correction to protect Skyline's core technology and ensure its long-term growth. "The planned sale of the AI division would have been a catastrophic error," I stated firmly. "That division, built on my original research, represents Skyline's greatest competitive advantage and future potential." "And you now agree with that assessment?" Andrea asked Daniel directly. He met her gaze steadily. "The board vote was unanimous. The AI division will remain intact with increased investment. We're refocusing on our core strengths rather than pursuing aggressive expansion without sufficient foundation." Andrea tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notepad. "That's the business angle. But there's obviously a personal dimension here as well. You're married. One spouse has essentially taken control of the other's company. That's unusual to say, the least." This was the delicate territory we had prepared for, the personal dynamic that the Tech Insider piece planned to sensationalize. Daniel and I exchanged a glance, silently confirming our agreed approach. "Skyline was never just Daniel's company," I said carefully. "It was our creation, though over time, the external perception shifted. What's happening now is a rebalancing of influence to better reflect both our contributions and to strengthen Skyline's strategic position." "We're in a unique situation," Daniel added. "Most married couples don't share a corporate history like ours. But that history exists regardless of our personal relationship. Becca's technical expertise and strategic vision are valuable to Skyline irrespective of our marriage." It was a diplomatic answer that neither overstated our personal harmony nor gave Andrea anything that could feed the revenge narrative. We maintained this careful balance throughout the interview, presenting ourselves as professional partners with a complex history but a unified commitment to Skyline's future. As the interview concluded, Andrea asked one final question. "Where do you see yourselves and Skyline a year from now?" It was a seemingly simple query that touched on the profound uncertainty at the heart of our situation. Would we still be married? Still working together? Would one of us eventually exit the company? These were questions neither of us could honestly answer yet. Skyline will be focused on extending our AI capabilities into new market segments, Daniel replied, staying on safe professional ground. We have tremendous opportunities to build on our technical foundation. I nodded in agreement. The company's future is extraordinarily bright, as for our personal roles within it. I paused, searching for words that were neither false, promises nor revelations of our private uncertainty. We're committed to ensuring Skyline's success, whatever form that ultimately takes. Andrea studied us for a moment, clearly aware there was more beneath the surface, but professional enough not to press further. Thank you both for sharing your perspective. I'll have a draft to you within the hour for approval before we publish. As we left the Business Journal offices, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the city streets. Daniel and I walked in silence for a moment, both processing the interview and its implications. You were good in there, he said finally. Clear, confident, professional. So were you, I acknowledged. Thank you for being direct about everything. He nodded. It seemed like the right approach. Better to acknowledge the past oversight than pretend it never happened. We reached our cars, parked side by side in the garage beneath the building. Another decision point. Would we return to the office together to review the article draft, or go our separate ways until tomorrow? I should check in with the AI team before the end of day, Daniel said, answering the unasked question. They've been waiting for clearer direction since yesterday's announcement. Of course, I agreed, vaguely disappointed but not entirely surprised. Despite our professional alignment in the interview, the personal distance between us remained. I'll review the article draft when it comes through and send you my suggested edits. He hesitated, keys in hand. About tomorrow. The emergency board meeting, I supplied. Kevin's attempt to challenge the acquisition. Yes. Daniel's expression turned serious. He'll have prepared thoroughly. Legal objections? Procedural? Concerns? Possibly attempts to trigger clauses in the corporate bylaws about contested ownership changes. I'm not worried, I said, with more confidence than I entirely felt. Eleanor has reviewed every aspect of the acquisition. It's legally sound. Kevin isn't just going for legal challenges, Daniel warned. He'll try to create division between us, among the other board members, within the executive team. He's a master of corporate politics. I studied Daniel, trying to understand his motivation for sharing this insight. Why are you telling me this? Kevin is your ally. Has been since the beginning. Daniel's eyes met mine, his expression unexpectedly earnest. Because whatever happened between us personally, Skyline deserves stability and clear direction. Your strategy for the company is sound, Becca. Better than mine was. I can acknowledge that now. It was perhaps the most direct validation he had offered since this all began. Not just a reluctant acceptance of my authority, but a genuine acknowledgement of my vision. Thank you, I said quietly. That means a lot, coming from you. We parted ways with a new understanding between us. Not reconciliation exactly, but a clearer sense of shared purpose regarding Skyline's future. The personal questions remained unresolved, but professionally, we were finding a workable alignment. The Business Journal article went live just after 8 that evening, presenting exactly the narrative we had crafted. Skyline's co-founder reasserting her rightful role to protect the company's technical foundation and future direction. Daniel and I were quoted extensively, our statements reinforcing the image of professional partnership despite the unusual circumstances. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by other business publications, including TechCrunch and The Wall Street Journal. The narrative we had established was taking hold, effectively neutralizing the spurned wife revenge angle that Tech Insider had planned. It was a tactical victory in the ongoing battle to define how the business world would perceive this transition. I was reviewing the coverage from the quiet of my hotel room. I had checked back in after the interview, needing space to process everything, when Eleanor called. "Well played," she said without preamble. "The business journal piece is excellent. Perfect tone, perfect timing." "It seems to be working," I agreed. "The tech blogs are already following their framing rather than the revenge narrative." "And how was it, presenting a united front with Daniel?" I considered the question carefully. Surprisingly straightforward. Whatever our personal issues, Daniel understands the business implications of appearing divided. He was completely professional. "And tomorrow's board meeting?" Eleanor asked. "Are you prepared for Kevin's challenge?" "As prepared as I can be." Daniel actually warned me about Kevin's likely tactics. He seems to be aligning with my position, at least professionally. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Interesting. I wouldn't have predicted that. Be careful. Becca. Daniel is adaptable. It's what made him successful. He may be calculating that supporting you now gives him more options later. "I know," I acknowledged, "but I also think he genuinely cares about Skyline's success, independent of his ego." He admitted today that my strategy for the company is better than his was. That couldn't have been easy for him. "People are complex," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "Even those who have hurt us can surprise us with moments of integrity." She paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will test you in different ways. Kevin won't give up control of the board without a fight." After we hung up, I stood by the hotel window, watching the harbor lights shimmer on the dark water. The same view I had contemplated just days ago, contemplating the magnitude of what I was about to do. So much had changed since then. My professional identity reclaimed, my marriage in flux, my future uncertain but undeniably my own again. My phone chimed with a text from Danielle. "Just saw the coverage. Well done. We make a good team when we're aligned." It was a simple message, but it carried echoes of our earlier partnership, the mutual respect and shared vision that had once defined our relationship. I hesitated, then replied, "Yes, we do. Thank you for today." His response came quickly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we face Kevin together." Together. The word lingered in my mind as I prepared for bed. Was it possible to forge a new kind of partnership from the ashes of the old one? Not the unequal arrangement it had become, but something more balanced, more honest? I didn't have answers yet, only questions. But for the first time since this all began, I felt the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by opposition. Neither capitulation to Daniel's dismissal of my worth, nor triumph over him through corporate maneuvers, but something more complex, and perhaps more meaningful. Mutual recognition of each other's strengths and contributions. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 the following morning in Skyline's formal boardroom. I arrived early, wanting time to center myself before the confrontation began. To my surprise, Daniel was already there, reviewing documents, at the head of the table. He looked up as I entered. "Morning. Sleep okay?" "Well enough," I replied, setting my briefcase on the table. "You're here early." "Wanted to review the acquisition documents one more time," he explained. "Kevin will look for any technical violation, however minor." I nodded, appreciating his thoroughness. Eleanor had 3 separate legal teams verify everything. The acquisition is clean. Daniel didn't seem entirely reassured. Kevin is resourceful, and he has influence with several board members who weren't at the initial meeting. "You're worried," I observed. "Cautious," he corrected. "This is the first real challenge to your authority. How the board responds will set the tone for your leadership going forward." Our conversation was interrupted as board members began to arrive. The mood was tense, formal greetings exchanged with careful neutrality. Kevin Parker entered last, his expression carefully composed, but his eyes calculating as he noted Daniel and me standing near each other at the head of the table. Shall we begin? Kevin suggested, taking his seat at the opposite end of the body table. We have significant matters to address. As board chair, Kevin had the right to lead the meeting. I took my seat, conscious of the symbolic importance of my position. Not beside Daniel as his wife, not relegated to an observer's chair, as in the past, but at the table as a full participant with decision-making authority. I've called this emergency meeting, Kevin began, to address concerns about the recent change in Skyline's ownership structure. While the board acknowledged Phoenix Ventures' acquisition of majority shares in our last meeting, several governance questions remain unresolved. He proceeded to outline his concerns, technical questions about disclosure timing, implications for existing shareholder agreements, potential conflicts of interest given my personal relationship with the CEO. Each point was presented with careful legal phrasing, designed to create doubt about the acquisition's propriety without directly challenging its legality. When Kevin finished, he looked directly at me. Given these unresolved questions, I propose that the board temporarily suspend recognition of Phoenix Ventures' voting rights until a full independent review can be conducted. This would be a prudent measure to protect the company from potential legal challenges. It was exactly as Daniel had predicted, an attempt to neutralize my influence while creating procedural obstacles. If the board approved Kevin's proposal, my majority ownership would become temporarily meaningless, returning control to the previous power structure, with Daniel and Kevin at the center. Before I could respond, Daniel spoke up. I think that's unnecessary, Kevin. The acquisition was conducted legally through public markets. Our legal team has reviewed the documentation and found no violations of securities law or corporate governance requirements. Kevin's surprise at Daniel's intervention was briefly visible before his professional mask returned. With all due respect, Daniel, your position in this matter is complicated by your personal relationship with the acquirer. The board needs objective assurance. Then let's hear from legal directly, I suggested, my voice calm but firm. Skyline's general counsel has reviewed all documentation. Perhaps she can address the board's concerns. The general counsel, Patricia Winters, was a seasoned corporate attorney who had been with Skyline for 5 years. I had met with her privately, yesterday after the executive lunch, sharing all documentation related to the acquisition. She had confirmed what Eleanor's team had already established. The takeover was legally sound. Patricia presented her findings systematically, addressing each of Kevin's concerns with specific legal citations and precedents. As she spoke, I watched the board members' expressions, noting who seemed relieved by her assurances and who remained skeptical. When Patricia finished, Kevin tried another approach. While the legal technicalities may be satisfied, there's still the question of business continuity and strategic stability. This sudden change in ownership and direction creates significant uncertainty for our clients and partners. Actually, Daniel interjected, yesterday's executive meeting established clear continuity protocols. The AI division will receive increased focus, but our client commitments remain unchanged. The press coverage has been largely positive, emphasizing strategic realignment rather than disruption. It was remarkable to observe Daniel actively, supporting my position, countering Kevin's arguments with the same executive authority he had always commanded. Whether motivated by genuine belief in the new direction or by pragmatic acceptance of the inevitable, his alignment was shifting. The dynamic in the room. Kevin's frustration became increasingly evident as his objections were methodically addressed. Finally, he played his last card. There's still the fundamental question of governance. Phoenix Ventures' acquisition effectively concentrates control in the hands of the CEO's wife. This creates an unprecedented situation with significant potential for conflicts of interest. I'd like to address that directly, I said, speaking up for the first time since the meeting began. All eyes turned to me as I stood, a deliberate choice to claim the physical authority of the room. First, The characterization of me primarily as the CEO's wife is precisely the misrepresentation we're now correcting. I am Skyline's co-founder. The technical patents underlying our most valuable products bear my name. My credentials and expertise in this industry stand on their own merits. I moved around the table slowly as I spoke, making eye contact with each board member. Second, Phoenix Ventures is not seeking to disrupt Skyline's operations or leadership. Daniel continues as CEO. The executive team remains intact. What's changing is our strategic focus, returning to the innovation-centered approach that built this company's success in the first place. I stopped directly across from Kevin, meeting his gaze steadily. And finally, regarding conflicts of interest. Every board member here represents specific interests, whether as major shareholders, industry partners, or executive leadership. The potential for conflict exists in any governance structure. The safeguard is transparency and adherence to fiduciary responsibility, both of which Phoenix Ventures is fully committed to. The room was silent when I finished. I had addressed Kevin's concerns directly without defensiveness or hostility, presenting myself as a reasoned, legitimate business leader, rather than an emotional actor in a personal drama. After a moment, Jason Reynolds spoke up from his position midway down the table. As CFO, I can confirm that the revised strategy Ms. Morgan presented makes sound financial sense. The AI division has consistently shown the highest profit margins and growth potential in our portfolio. Refocusing on that strength while taking a more measured approach to expansion represents responsible stewardship of company resources. His use of Ms. Morgan, rather than Mrs. Morgan, was a subtle but significant acknowledgement of my independent, professional identity. One by one, other board members began to express similar support, some cautiously, others more enthusiastically, but creating undeniable momentum against Kevin's objections. Kevin recognized his position weakening. His final attempt was to call for a formal vote on his proposed suspension of Phoenix Ventures' voting rights. The motion was defeated 7-2, with only Kevin and one longtime ally voting in favor. As the meeting concluded, the shift in the room was palpable. Board members who had initially been hesitant to engage with me directly now approached to introduce themselves more formally, to discuss aspects of the new strategy, to establish working relationships. The legitimacy conferred by the board's vote, combined with Daniel's visible support, had solidified my position in a way that mere share ownership could not. Kevin left quickly after the vote, his usual smooth confidence noticeably diminished. As the boardroom emptied, Daniel approached me with a small, private smile. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You handled that perfectly." "We handled it," I corrected. "Your support made a significant difference." He nodded, acknowledging the point. It was the right position to take, for Skyline, for the strategy, for all of us. We stood there for a moment, the empty boardroom around us a physical representation of the corporate battlefield we had just navigated together rather than against each other. "Coffee?" Daniel suggested. "There's a lot to discuss about next steps." It was a simple invitation, yet loaded with significance. Not a return to our previous dynamic, but perhaps the beginning of a new one. Professional collaborators finding their way toward a more equal partnership. "I'd like that," I agreed. As we walked together toward the executive floor, employees watched with undisguised curiosity. The power dynamic between us was of intense interest throughout the organization. Would we function as rivals, as reluctant collaborators, or as something else entirely? The truth was, we ourselves didn't yet know the answer. The professional alignment we had found during the board meeting was a beginning, not an end. The personal questions remained. Could respect once lost be fully regained? Could a marriage survive such a fundamental shift in power and perception? Did we even want it to, or were we evolving towards something else entirely? These were questions, without simple answers, requiring time and honest conversation to resolve. But as we settled into Daniel's office with coffee, beginning to outline next steps for Skyline's refocused strategy, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when working with my husband: equality. Not just in title or ownership, but in how we engaged with each other's ideas, how we built on each other's thinking, how we navigated disagreements. The woman he had dismissed as just a housewife at that fateful gala was gone forever. In her place stood someone who had reclaimed not just her professional identity, but her fundamental sense of self-worth. Someone who would never again allow her voice to be silenced or her contributions erased. Whether our marriage would evolve alongside this professional realignment remained to be seen. Perhaps we would find our way to a new kind of partnership, both personal and professional. Perhaps we would eventually part ways personally while maintaining our business connection. Or perhaps something else entirely would emerge from this transformation. What mattered now was that the future, in all its uncertainty, was one I was choosing rather than accepting. One where my voice, my vision, and my value were recognized not just by others, but most importantly, by myself. When Daniel had called me just a housewife at his party, he hadn't known I had already bought his company. But more significantly, he hadn't recognized that the woman he had slowly diminished over the years had never truly disappeared. She had been watching, learning, growing stronger, preparing not just to reclaim her place in the company she had helped build, but to chart a future defined by her own choices rather than by someone else's limitations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.